My name is Christa Lingham, and I'm coming to you today from my home in Rapanion, about 350 kilometres northwest of Melbourne. I'm actually enjoying today because it's one of the few times in all my years of being an elder that I haven't had to drive anywhere or travel anywhere to give a service. I am really enjoying the more leisurely pace. I'm not sure what it's like where you are, but here it's a beautiful sunny day with hardly a gust of wind. But hopefully you will enjoy your Sunday as much as I will. The theme for today is legacy. It's about what we leave behind, but it's also about what we inherit and what we have achieved or learnt from the people who have gone before us. And it's what we also hope to pass on to our future generations. The reading for today is from John chapter 12, verses 24 to 26, and it's from the Bible for today. I tell you for certain that a grain of wheat that falls on the ground will never be more than 1 grain unless it dies. But if it dies, it will produce lots of wheat. If you love your life, you will lose it. If you give it up in this world, you will be given an eternal life. If you serve me, you must go with me. My servants will be with me wherever I am. If you serve me, my Father will honor you. Wheat is often used in the Bible as a metaphorical symbol of nourishment. It is both physical nourishment, being able to feed one's body, but it's also about spiritual nourishment and the way it can feed and nourish our souls. The text is talking about how we need to live our best life and to live it to the best of our ability, and we can be remembered, or we will be remembered, and that will be our legacy. This year has turned out differently in many ways and for many people. And it really hasn't been the way we thought it would be at the start of the year. As someone who reads a lot, and probably more in the past than currently, I can't remember about other pandemics being present in literature. Not what I've read, and it may be rather narrow. And I was thinking especially the Spanish flu. I was reflecting back on the children's books I used to read, as these were often set between the wars or just after. There was never any mention of the pandemic, but in many cases a parent or parents were absent. It was stated the parents had died, but no further given. Did they die of the flu? The father missing could be explained by the war, but in many cases the mothers had died too. And I've always thought it was the absence of the parents, or the parents, was so commonplace it was unremarkable. Maybe that is where you see the legacy of the Spanish flu in literature, or especially in China. It's the not being mentioned, people being absent and not being there. Apart from that, the only one I could think of was Albert Camus' The Plague, which was, of course, all about a pandemic, a plague in a town. It wasn't necessarily about a pandemic. There's been much discussion about what may be the lasting cultural changes from the pandemic. What are the lasting cultural and customs that may flow from the pandemic? I feel it may vary from place to place, as people's experience of the pandemic is very different. So we could talk about elbow bumps. I'm not sure if that will last. I've noticed that in my workplace, because I'm working as a worker in an essential industry, that really elbow bumps only get used when someone actually goes to try to shake hands. And one of the things I have noticed is that many people don't go to shake hands anymore. It's just the nod of the head in greeting. And for me, that change of no touching and not having to greet everyone by handshakes or more is really appreciative because I don't necessarily like that. Masks, I don't think mask wearing is going to last. There are so many people I have met for whom the mask does end up around the chin, more because as they speak, it falls down. But one thing I have noticed is in my workplace and around the place is that many people are actually standing further apart. The longer it goes on, that 1.5 metre rule is being observed really quite well. And that's even in the noisy factory environment where I work, where talking and hearing is difficult. It's funny, our bodies can be 1.5 metres apart, but we're leaning in to hear each other. Not quite, but it's still that whole sense of personal space, that our personal space is expanded again. How long that will last, and again, is a difficult one to judge, because as we start to go out to bars and restaurants where we are squeezed in tightly, we might find that sense of personal space will shrink again. In recent times, there's been discussion about other behaviour changes that have come from COVID-19, and one of them is the increased level of kindness in society. How people are actively looking out for each other and doing deeds that are kind, that help nourish other people. And it's interesting how one act of kindness can lead to another. I did a service a few years ago on kindness, and it's talked about again in the Templar Reflections, that kindness leads not only to increased kindness back to us, but it tends to spread out. It goes out to the rest of the society. That is one of the changes I hope that will stay in our society, that we will become more kind to each other. What other things have changed that could be considered a legacy? Many have found the joy of gardening and planted many vegetables. Self-sufficiency is something we are starting to appreciate, to be able to make things and to grow things. Gardens have become precious and many love their plants. All living things die or can be cut down. We forget or don't know how old trees are, and though we can preserve them through heritage orders, there is still an impermanence to them. Trees may be around for 100 years or so, but they can be cut down earlier, or some species don't live that long. Gardens are changed. Some may be kept, but in general, each person puts their own stamp on them. It's the Edna Walling gardens, which are very much treasured, are great, but there are people who are having to go back and revive them because the bones are there, but the plantings have certainly changed. The world, though, seems to fall into two camps: those that love gardening and those that don't. As a non-gardener, I'll make a rash statement that the love of gardening is passed down in our genes. My hypothesis is that when humans started settling or decided that planting food crops they wanted was a better bet than going out gathering food, those that could grow the food well flourished and passed on not only the skill and knowledge of growing plants, but the actual love of going out and working in the garden. It was a necessary task for survival. Those who could garden and farm thrived and passed on that gene. And that's something that existed well through until the early 1900s in the Western society, and is still the case in many Asian and African countries. To live, one needs to garden. Art is and artworks are something that can also last a long time. It is, however, dependent on the appreciation of those viewing or hearing or experiencing the art. Theatre is a much more impermanent and a transient form of art form, where once it's been performed, that performance is gone and can only exist in memory. Behind me, you can see a painting of flowers. It was done on glass by an artist, M.B. Dorr, in November 1895. And according to an art expert I showed it to many years ago, it is a door panel painted by an amateur artist. Amateur only because there is no record of any sales by the person. I've got no idea who the artist is either. To the best of my knowledge, it was a wedding present to my husband's great-grandparents. And we only received it because we were living away and nothing much was left by the time they had to divvy out the household. We were lucky because we both really loved that painting, and it has been moved with us many times. I'd also love to know more about the artist, but appreciate that I may never know. In the last 20 years, we have witnessed destruction of monuments and artworks created thousands of years ago. In particular, I'm referring to the large statues of Buddha destroyed by the Taliban in 2001. They were 3,000 years old. It's sad because they were carved so long ago and can never be recreated. It was a memorial to the Buddha and a testament to the faith of those who carved their works. But though we are missing a lovely cultural icon and some wonderful artwork, we haven't lost the Buddhist faith. And that is part of that description of what is meant by the wheat giving on nourishment after it has died. It is an idea or a set of beliefs or a way of life that have decided or deemed to be good and that are then passed on. The legacy of Jesus, Buddha, and the Prophet Muhammad and other religious figures can be seen in the way their influence on people and ideas and the way people live their lives. They all worked on a principle of teaching and passing on their thoughts, and the ideas which were then taken up after their death. Their followers increased in numbers after they had passed on. It was a ripple effect. We'll come to our first hymn, which is hymn 91, which actually describes this effect. It's called Pebbles.
One little pebble and the circles begin. Circle in a circle, they go on without end. Ripples on the water move across the pond. The pebble disappears, but the circles move along. Circles on water from one little stone. The water is smooth if you leave it alone. Each pebble you toss makes a difference, you see. The ripples that circle can touch you and me. Pebbles of good and pebbles of bad, circles of happiness and circles of sad. No way to stop them once they begin. Stop and think a minute, then drop your pebble in. Circles on water from one little stone. The water is smooth if you leave it alone. Each pebble you toss makes a difference, you see. The ripples that circle can touch you and me.
Legacy is about remembrance and how we remember people. We look back at lives and we see how they intersect with our lives. Many people have used the quiet periods this year to look through their photos and working out what should be kept and what should be thrown out. It is about curating the past and telling the story of their lives as they see it. In Søren Kierkegaard's words, it is about that the life must be understood. I'll actually start that quote again. It is perfectly true, as philosophers say, that life must be understood backwards, but they forget the other proposition that it must be lived forwards. Next Sunday would have been Volkstrauertag at Tatura. Due to COVID, the German consulate has decided to cancel this year's service. And though it is understandable, it is a wise decision that has left many without the ability to remember those that were important to them, to remember the German and Australian war dead. And that becomes a sadness that stays with people. We're coming up to the 11th, Remembrance Day. And again, as we're opening up, we can celebrate that again together, but in a more distanced way. And we want to have a chance to be able to remember those people who have died more recently, as well as those who have died in the past, and to remember at times perhaps at Tatura and the legacy that has had on it. We will observe a minute's silence to honour those who have died at that time, but also those others who have died since. As we reflect, remember those who've died, we distill the essence of that person, the things that remind us most about that person. It's a mixture of things of what they did in their lives, their values that they passed on, their talents, their likes and their dislikes. And when we celebrate funerals, we do think about the joy that they have brought to other people and how they are remembered. For example, it's one that's very recent to me, which is why I'm using it, is my mother-in-law passed on earlier this year, but she was famous throughout our little town that when she bought a plate, she always bought cheese scones. This recipe is all the family and the grandchildren who make it whenever they need to bring a plate. But when we died, as we were remembering her, Grandma's cheese scones certainly made an appearance, both at the first lunch after her death and again at the funeral, and again a few days later when we shared the funeral video with her sister-in-laws. And it's also about traditions that we pass on and the things that as a parent you don't know that you instill in your children because you don't see it and that's never talked about it. I remember the warm, fuzzy feeling I got and the connection I felt to my children who are spread across Australia, one in Canberra, one in Perth, one in Melbourne. But there was a bing on our family chat as they all shared pictures of the Moldashen they had made. It was we always had Moldashen at Easter, and though I had tradition up from my family, it was not on Donnerstag that we had it. It was always some other time, because working, I didn't always have the time to make them on the Thursday. But it was still nice that they remembered that sometime over Easter you have Moldashen, and they were willing to go out of their way to make it. There are other ways we can be remembered. I read an article in the Australian Financial Review last week about the Nobel Prizes. The story in the article went like this. In Le Figaro, the French paper, published a brief obituary announcing the death of Alfred Nobel. He was the inventor of dynamite, noting a man who can hardly be passed off as the benefactor of humanity died yesterday in Cannes. Other obituaries also use the term merchant of death. Nobel was not dead. It was his brother who had died. But having read how he would be remembered, Alfred Nobel decided he wanted to be remembered differently. It was at that point he established the trust fund to fund the Nobel Prizes, and today his name is much more associated with the Nobel Prizes, with peace, with economics, with medicine. And it is all about rewarding those people who strive to make the world a better place. It is the fact that he invented dynamite is now only a footnote in his life. If we knew how we would be remembered, what would we do to change the ending, to change others' opinions of ourselves? We can't all be like Alfred Nobel and establish a prize. Not all of us have money to fund bequests or foundations, which is the other way people like to spend money to improve the world's lot. Realistically, all we can do is to live our lives to the best of our abilities. If we put together the teachings of Jesus, and it would include making the most of our talents and using them to help others. Today's text warns about using your talent only for your benefit and to prove your life. If you love your life, you will lose it. And if we drill down to it, what does that mean for us Templars? It is to live by our motto. Set your mind on God's kingdom and his justice before everything else, and all the rest will come to you as well. Or in simpler language that we are now starting to use, it is to seek the best we can be and make the world a better place. And the best way of achieving this, in our view, as Templars, is to be guided by the twin commandments of love. Love God with all your being and love your neighbour as yourself. Just living your life in that way will lead to positive interaction and a compassionate life, which in turn means we are remembered with love rather than hatred, and that we have improved the lot of people we meet. We are passing on our kindness and our love. With those principles in mind, though, we can try to create a just, compassionate world in harmony with our environment and achieve through community connections. It is all about the interconnectedness. It is not something we can achieve on our own. It does mean working with people across a broad range of backgrounds. It means standing up for our beliefs, for looking outward and not withdrawing into a cocoon where we are most comfortable. If we understand correctly the teaching of Jesus and follow them, life will not necessarily be comfortable, and it will be hard, as in these times being different is often met with harshness. But if you have made a difference to this world, if you've just affected one person's life, you will be remembered for that achievement. Rather than a traditional spoken prayer, let us sing a hymn. I've selected hymn 11, an evening prayer. give a blessing, and I came across this quite a few years ago and would like to share it with you. For you, deep stillness. For you, deep stillness of the silent inland. For you, deep blue of desert skies. For you, flame red of the rocks and stones. For you, sweet water from the hidden spring. From the edges seek the heartlands. When you're burnt by the journey, may the cool winds of the hovering spirit soothe and replenish you. We're almost at the end of our service, and I'd like to invite you all to join the chat afterwards. The link to the chat is in the chat box below, or you'll find it in your registration email. I'd also like to take this time to thank Ange, especially when I had my meltdown early on, for calming me and making sure that I could get through this. I'd like to thank Heather because I cheekily had borrowed an evening prayer and the music and the words from her service, even though it is in our hymn book. Today's service was about legacy. It is about what we leave behind, but unspoken in that is often the question, where do we go when we die? I read the following in the Good Weekend last weekend, and it does encapsulate some of the ideas covered. It was an interview done by David Lesser with Bruce Springsteen, and I would like to quote, "Where do we go when we die? Maybe we go nowhere, or maybe everywhere. Maybe the soul resides in the ether, in the starless part of the sky that resonates outward like a star dropped into a still lake that circles with the lives of people we've touched over the course of our lives. No one knows where or how far their soul may travel. Wherever we go, those whom we've cherished are never completely lost to us. They exist beyond words, in the talismans left behind, in the shadowlands of our memories and in our dreams. I'll see you in my dreams, up round the river bend, for death is not the end.